So somebody could be casting out devils from pigs, and that wouldn't prove he was the Son of God.
I think that's right. In fact, there were Jewish exorcists.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Grab a seat, because this one is a proper heavyweight clash of ideas. Today we're stepping into a legendary exchange between Christopher Hitchens, one of the sharpest atheist voices of his generation, and William Lane Craig, a heavyweight Christian philosopher and debater. What starts as a calm conversation about what atheism even means slowly turns into Christopher putting the supernatural claims of faith under a microscope, virgin births, exorcisms, miracles, and a resurrection passage that gets stranger the closer you look. And the way it unravels is something you have to see for yourself. Trust me, you'll want to stick around all the way to the end, because the final stretch is where the whole thing quietly tips over. And before we get into it, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're watching from. I genuinely love seeing how far this channel reaches. Alright, enough from me. Let's get into it.
Let's talk first about whether there are any good arguments to think that atheism is true. Now, it seems to me that you're rather ambivalent here, that you say, you redefine atheism to mean a sort of atheism or non-theism.
That's what it means.
But how do you distinguish then the different varieties of non-theism? For example, what is normally called atheism, agnosticism, or the view of verificationists that the statement God exists is simply meaningless?
Well, I mean, there are different schools of atheism, as you say, but there's no claim I know how to make that says atheism is true, because atheism is the statement that a certain proposition isn't true. So I wish you'd get this bit right, because it's there you go again.
Well,
I just devoted a little time to this. I said it is not in itself a belief or a system. It simply says you can get by better, probably, we think, without the assumption that no one who wants you to worship a God has ever been able to come up with a good enough reason to make you do it.
Now, so the point is, though, that on your definition of atheism or non-theism, it really embodies a diversity of views, such as agnosticism, what is normally called atheism, or this verificationism. Now, which of those do you hold to within this umbrella of atheism? Are you an atheist who asserts the proposition God does not exist, or do you simply withhold belief in God in the way the agnostic does?
Right. On some days, I'm a great. No, I'm not going to do you that much of a favor. On some days, I'm a great admirer of Thomas Huxley, who had the great debate with Bishop Wilberforce in Oxford at the Natural History Museum about Darwinism in the mid-19th century, and who was known as Darwin's bulldog. We would now say Darwin's pit bull, and who completely trounced the good bishop. But I can't thank him for inventing the term agnostic. And I can't thank him for some of his social Darwinist positions either, some of which are rather unattractive.
Now, I need an answer to this. My time is fleeting.
But because I think agnosticism is evasive. To me, yes, if you talk about the power of the Holy Spirit and so forth, to me, that is meaningless. It's to me, I'm sorry, I've tried. It's white noise. It's like saying there is only one God and Allah is his messenger. It's gibberish to me. There are many of us, I'm sorry, there are just many of us of whom this is the case. It may be true, it is true.
Okay, Mr. Hitchens, I got to press you here, again, because time is fleeting.
Feel free.
What is your view exactly?
Press away.
Do you affirm God does not exist, or do you simply withhold belief?
I think once I have said that I've never seen any persuasive evidence for the existence of something, and I've made real attempts to study the evidence presented and the arguments presented, that I will go as far as to say, have the nerve to say, that it does not therefore exist, except in the minds of its, except in the Henry Jamesian subjective sense that you say of it being so real to some people in their own minds that it counts as a force in the world. Yes.
Okay, so you do affirm then that God does not exist. Now, what I want to know, and do you have any justification for that?
I think I've come unwired in some horrible way.
You're fine.
Are you sure?
Do you have any arguments leading to the conclusion that God does not exist?
Well, I would rather. I think I'm wondering if I'm boring anybody now. I would rather say. I'd rather state it in reverse and say I find all the arguments in favor to be fallacious or unconvincing. And I'd have to add that though this isn't my reason for not believing in it, that I would be very depressed if it was true. But that's a quite different thing. I don't say of atheism that it's at all morally superior. That would be very risky. I wouldn't admit that it was at all morally inferior either, but we can at least be acquitted on the charge of wishful thinking.
I wonder if that's the case. Would you agree that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence?
Well, you know, I'm not sure that I would agree.
This is the part so many people get wrong, and Christopher nails it within the first 30 seconds. The whole framing is rigged from the start. William keeps trying to box him into picking a flavor of non-belief, like he has to sign up for some rigid doctrine, and Christopher just refuses to play that game. He says it plainly. Christopher put it like this: "There's no claim I know how to make that says atheism is true, because atheism is the statement that a certain proposition isn't true. And that is the move that wins the whole exchange. You have to understand why this matters. Atheism was never a competing belief system. It's not a church with its own dogma. It's the refusal to accept a claim that hasn't earned acceptance yet. So when William demands a positive doctrine to attack, he's swinging at something that was never there." Then Christopher goes further, and this is the part I love. He talks about the language of faith itself. Christopher said it bluntly. "If you talk about the power of the Holy Spirit and so forth, to me that is meaningless. It's white noise." He's not being rude for sport. He's pointing at something real. When a claim can't be tested, can't be measured, can't even be defined sharply, it stops carrying information. It becomes sound without content. What gets me is how honest he is about his own reasoning. He doesn't pretend he has some grand cosmic disproof. Christopher said this: "I find all the arguments in favor to be fallacious or unconvincing." That's the whole position. Not arrogance, just an unmet burden. And then the cleanest line of the round. Christopher said we can at least be acquitted on the charge of wishful thinking, because that's the quiet accusation always thrown at non-believers, right? And he flips it without ever raising his voice.
Okay. Let's turn to the moral argument and talk about that a little bit. I think you've misunderstood the moral argument.
Given the stakes, Doctor, given the stakes, you're not saying, we're not talking about unicorns or tooth fairies or leprechauns here. We're talking about an authority that would give other human beings the right to tell me what to do in the name of God. So for a claim like that, if there's no evidence for it, it seems to me not a small question.
No, it's certainly not a small question.
Because you're making a very, very, very large claim. Your evidence had better be absolutely magnificent, it seems to me. And it's the lack of magnificence, I think, that began to strike me first.
One final question, Doctor.
Okay, well, let's go to the moral argument. It seems to me there that you've misunderstood the argument in that we're looking for an objective foundation for the moral values and duties that we both, I think, want to affirm. It's not a matter of whether or not we can know what is right and wrong, or that we need God to tell us what is right and wrong. It's rather that we need to have some sort of an objective foundation for right and wrong. Wouldn't you agree on your view? It's simply the sociobiological spin-offs of the evolutionary process, and that therefore these do not provide any sort of objective foundation for moral values and duties.
That could be true, yes. That could well be true. Yeah, I don't want to be too much of a reductionist, but it's entirely possible that it is purely evolutionary and functional. One wants to think that there's a bit more to one's love for the fellow creature than that. But it doesn't add one iota of weight or moral gravity to the argument to say, but that's because I don't believe in a supernatural being. It's a non sequitur.
Mr. Hitchens, your questions for Dr. Craig.
Well, I'd like to know first, you said that the career of Jesus of Nazareth involved a ministry of miracles and exorcisms. When you say exorcism, do you mean that you believe in devils too?
What I meant there was that most historians agree that Jesus of Nazareth practiced miracle working and he practiced exorcisms. I'm not committing myself, nor are historians committing themselves to the reality of demons, but they are saying that Jesus did practice exorcism and he practiced healing.
So you believe that Jesus of Nazareth caused devils to leave the body of a madman and go into a flock of pigs that hurled themselves down the Gadarene slopes into the sea?
Do I believe that's historical? Yes.
Right. That would be sorcery, wouldn't it, though?
No, it would be an illustration of Jesus' ability to command even the forces of darkness, and therefore an illustration of the sort of divine authority that he was able to command and exercise. This, as I say, is illustrative of this unprecedented sense of divine authority that Jesus of Nazareth had, that he even could command the forces of darkness and that they would obey. So whether you think he was a genuine exorcist or that he merely believed himself to be an exorcist, what is historically undeniable is that he had this radical sense of divine authority, which he expressed by miracle working and exorcisms.
Okay, watch what happens the second William pivots to morality, because this is where the trap is supposed to spring shut, and it just doesn't. William reaches for the old argument: if your morality is only biology, then it has no real foundation, so where does right and wrong actually come from? And Christopher does something disarming. He partly agrees. He says, fine, maybe it is evolutionary, maybe it is functional. But then he lands the blow people miss. Christopher said it doesn't add one iota of weight or moral gravity to the argument to say that's because I don't believe in a supernatural being. It's a non sequitur. Here's what people don't realize. Admitting morality has natural roots does not hand the win to the believer. Saying our compassion evolved is not the same as saying our compassion is fake. A thing can be both natural and meaningful. William needed Christopher to flinch, and he just calmly refused. Then the round flips, and this is my favorite stretch. Christopher gets the questions, and he goes straight for the supernatural machinery. Christopher asked this: when you say exorcism, do you mean that you believe in devils too? Such a simple question, but it forces William to own what he's actually committing to. And when William affirms the story of demons driven into a herd of pigs as historical, Christopher delivers it. Christopher said, that would be sorcery, wouldn't it though? That's the brilliance of it. He's using William's own framework against him. If a man commands invisible forces and they obey, by what standard do we call one wonder worker holy and another a sorcerer? William's reply leans entirely on assuming the conclusion. William said it would be an illustration of Jesus' ability to command even the forces of darkness. But that only works if you already believe the very thing you're trying to prove.
Right. And you believe he was born of a virgin?
Yes, I believe that as a Christian. I couldn't claim to prove that historically. That's not part of my case tonight. But I as a Christian, I believe that.
And I know you believe in the resurrection, but
yes, and for that I think that we have good evidence.
As a matter of biblical, what shall we call it, consistency, it's said in one of the Gospels that at the time of the crucifixion, all the graves of Jerusalem were opened, and all the tenants of the graves walked the streets and greeted their old friends. It makes the resurrection sound rather a commonplace in the greater Jerusalem area.
It says, that's in the Gospel of Matthew, and that's actually attached to a crucifixion narrative.
That's what I said. It says at the time of the crucifixion.
Yes, that's right. At the time of the crucifixion, it says that there were appearances of Old Testament saints in Jerusalem at the time. This is part of Matthew's description of the crucifixion scene.
I mean, do you believe that?
I don't know whether Matthew intends this to be apocalyptic imagery or whether he means this to be taken literally. I've not studied it in any depth, and I'm open-minded about it. I'm willing to be convinced one way or the other.
You see, the reason I'm pressing you is this because, we know from Scripture that the Pharaoh's magicians could produce miracles. In the end, Aaron could outproduce them. But what I'm suggesting to you is even if the laws of nature can be suspended and great miracles can be performed, it doesn't prove the truth of the doctrine of the person who's performing them. Or would you not agree to that?
Not necessarily. I think that's right.
So somebody could be casting out devils from pigs, and that wouldn't prove he was the Son of God.
I think that's right. In fact, there were Jewish exorcists. The only point that I was trying to make there was that this was illustrative of the kind of divine authority that Jesus claimed, especially since he didn't cast them out in God's name, or he didn't perform miracles by praying to God. He would do them in his own authority. So that Jesus exercised an authority that was simply unheard of at that time, and for which he was eventually crucified because it was thought to be blasphemous.
Well, it was thought to be blasphemous to claim to be the Messiah, to be exact. The people who got the closest look at him, the Jewish Sanhedrin, thought that his claims were not genuine. So remember, if you're resting anything on eyewitnesses, the ones who we definitely know were there thought he was bogus. But, okay, I think I've got a rough idea, assuming you make that assumption of his pre-existing divinity, that it's a presuppositionalist case, I can see what you're driving at.
Well, no, I've got another
question.
And here is where the whole thing comes apart, calmly, politely, and completely. Christopher asks about the virgin birth, and listen to what William actually gives away. William admitted, I couldn't claim to prove that historically. Stop and sit with that. a central miracle of the faith, and the honest answer is that it can't be demonstrated, only believed. That is not a small thing to concede in a debate about evidence. Then comes the moment that makes me grin every single time. Christopher brings up a passage where, at the crucifixion, the tombs supposedly open and the dead walk back into the city to greet their old friends. And instead of arguing it head-on, he just describes it accurately and lets it fall apart under its own weight. Christopher said it makes resurrection sound rather commonplace in the greater Jerusalem area. That's the whole attack. No insult, just sunlight. And William, a man who has spent decades on this, can only say he hasn't really studied it and he's open-minded about it. When the expert goes quiet on his own text, you've learned something. Here's a piece of history worth knowing, because it sharpens everything. In the ancient world, miracle workers and exorcists were common. The Pharaoh's court magicians in the Exodus story are described matching the wonders Moses performs. So doing the miraculous never proved whose side you were on, and that's exactly the corner Christopher walks William into. Christopher asked, so somebody could be casting out devils from pigs and that wouldn't prove he was the Son of God? And William concedes it. The miracles, even if you grant every one of them, prove nothing about the doctrine. And the closer, the people standing right there, the ones with the best possible view, the council that examined him in person rejected the claim outright. Christopher said the ones who got the closest look thought he was bogus. That is the quiet checkmate. If your case rests on witnesses, you don't get to quietly drop the witnesses who said no. William ends up insisting he isn't assuming his conclusion, yet every answer he gave only worked if the conclusion was already true. And that is the whole difference between faith and a case actually built on evidence. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.